Assay testing and hallmarking is a legal requirement here in the United Kingdom. There are some exemptions and loopholes which I see people flagrantly exploiting as to reasons why they do not hallmark their silver. Certain interpretations, however, can yield pretty serious legal ramifications for not only those producers and sellers, but also customers in the UK who buy poured silver and then look to sell it down the line. So in today's video, I want to give an overview of hallmarking and issue a stark warning to producers of poured silver that do not hallmark. It is very important and a topic that I feel passionate about. So let's jump in and talk about these wonderful hallmarks. Hello everybody, Backyard Bullion here, and a warm welcome to you all joining us for this week's edition of In Focus Friday, the show where we take a good close look at cool things made of silver or gold. And for the first time in over 230 weekly episodes, we are featuring some of my own creations of poured silver. But I don't want to focus on those creations in particular. I want to talk about hallmarking. I want to talk about these marks which appear on my poured pieces of silver. I want to give an overview of what they're all about and give you all a little bit of education about why we do them and what value I think that they add, but also issue a stark warning to anybody out there in the UK that is thinking about producing poured silver or already is producing poured silver and not hallmarking, because it's a legal requirement. And by not hallmarking something that really should be hallmarked, and it is down to interpretation, but if you don't, you can face serious legal ramifications. And not only you, but your customers at the other end, when they come to sell it as well, they are also bound by the legal requirements of hallmarking, whether it's something they've made or not. So there's a lot of really important information to disseminate here. And I want to reiterate a point that this is not a legal advice video. It's my interpretations, it's my opinions on hallmarking. And if you are concerned about anything that you're doing and not following guidance or considering learning more about this, I would encourage you to look up the legislation. I'll put links to it down in the description below, and feel free to get in touch with me directly and we can talk more about this and I can share some of my understandings of hallmarking. Now, a little bit of history about hallmarking first. So hallmarking has been something that UK silver creators, silver, gold, platinum, palladium creators, whether it be jewelry, whether it be poured silver, have had to live with and work with for centuries, for 500, 600, 700, 800 years. For the Edinburgh Assay Office, they've been in operation since the 1500s, so over 500 years worth of history. And the word hallmarking really comes down to the olden times when you would be a smith of some kind, silver, goldsmith, whatever, and you would then take your items down to the goldsmith's hall. A lot of the places, the big towns, would have guilds where you would be able to go and get your items assayed. And at the time, of course, there wasn't a great deal of scientific assaying going on, so they didn't necessarily chemically test things, but they were experienced enough to know when things were genuine silver items or sterling silver, or at least thereabouts, and they would give their stamp of approval. And that follows through today, and we can see here some really gorgeous laser hallmarks that the Edinburgh Assay Office has done. Nowadays, of course, in this modern world, we can do things like laser hallmarking. Traditionally, they would be hand-stamped marks like we have on some of my other products here. But you know, the modern techniques now are a lot more rigorous than they were 500 years ago. Of course, we can now do chemical testing on the silver itself. They take drill samples, they'll use XRF machines, they'll do other sophisticated tests to ensure that the purity of what you're sending in meets the minimum standard requirements for that purity level. And of course, 999 silver is the highest purity level that you can get for assaying, and that is such an important thing to manage and make sure that you get those assay levels. To not get it is really, really critical. Now, it is a legal requirement, as I said, and there are some loopholes, I'm going to say, that are in the hallmarking legislation. And essentially, if you describe something as silver, gold, platinum, or palladium, it needs to be hallmarked. So you can, in theory, sell anything made out of silver, gold, platinum, palladium without a hallmark. You just can't use the word of the precious metal that it's made out of to sell it. And you can't imply that it's made out of it either. You can write things like white metal for silver, or yellow. Yellow metal is, I think, not allowed. But you can say sort of other coloured metals to describe the things. That's morally grey at best of times, legally grey as well at the best of times, in my opinion, and it's something that I just wouldn't recommend anybody going and touching. There are exemption weights, though, which are probably the most common thing that you might expect. So if you're producing, for example, a silver ring and it comes out at 7 grams or less, or 7.78 grams or less, you don't need to hallmark it. For gold, it's 1 gram palladium 1 gram, and platinum 0.5 gram. So there's lots of different weights of exemptions there. One of the big things, though, that I want to talk about today is some of the exemptions that people will use to make excuses as to why they don't hallmark. And one of the biggest ones is, I hear constantly, that bars and rounds are not required to be hallmarked. And that is in the hallmarking legislation. There's an exemptions clause, and it says in there that raw material in the form of bars, rounds, sheets and tubes are exempt from hallmarking. Or bullion. Now that's the phrasing. I'll come to the or bullion bit in a moment. Now, in my opinion, a poured piece of silver like this cannot, should not, and really would never be described as raw material. I've poured these, I've put sweat, blood, tears into them to create them, I've stamped them, I've got branding on them, and they are made with the idea of being retailed. They are not raw material. I cannot get away with arguing that. So for people to use that potential argument for bars is, in my opinion, completely wrong and illegal. I genuinely think that's illegal. It's against the hallmarking requirements, the hallmarking legislation, which is where the or bullion clause comes in. Now, of course, these are made of 999 silver, and that is bullion. There's just no doubting that there is bullion there. So one would argue that anything that you make out of silver, out of 999 silver, is bullion. And you see a lot of people perhaps using that excuse to get away with not hallmarking. But I think there needs to be a line drawn in the sand here. I think we need to really understand that interpretation can go both ways. And for me, bullion, which, by the way, unhelpfully isn't described or defined in the hallmarking legislation. For me, when you look up bullion, in Oxford English Dictionary, for example, it is about just raw form silver that's used as an investment in the metal itself. So, for example, this bar here, the Swiss Bank Corporation bar here, this is bullion. This is a bullion bar. This is meant and sold as nothing that would be created beyond its metal value weight. The Swiss Bank Corporation commissioned them, and you had thousands of them made, and that's basically it. It's just a bar of silver. People buy it with the idea that they would be investing in the metal. They don't buy it because they're investing in the Swiss Bank Corporation's brand. Yes, some bars, older ones, will become collectible over time, and that's a different kettle of fish to talk about altogether. But this is an investment bar. This is a bullion bar that you invest in. My kilo bars here, I've created these with significant amounts of skill and energy and effort and expense, and of course we've laser hallmarked them. And with the patterns created here, this takes numerous hours of different attempts and skills and expertise to get something looking this pretty. This is sold as not even a collectible, as a premium product. I have sold this, I haven't sold this one. This is technically for sale, but it is intended for sale at a higher price than the bullion weight within it. I've put time, energy, effort, skill into making it. So for it to be described as a bullion investment is, in my opinion, wrong, and it needs to be hallmarked, which I do. I hallmark everything, and that can be extrapolated down to smaller size bars as well. If you're creating bar-shaped silver, whether it be bar-shaped or round-shaped or whatever, and you are putting marks on it, you're putting specific marks on it, like you're putting your brand on it, for example, and you are then looking to sell it at a premium, that is not a bullion investment. It is a byproduct that it is made of bullion, but it is not a bullion investment, especially if you're charging significantly over the price of the metal that it cost to make it. It's just cut and dry in my mind. Now, of course, this is down to interpretation, and it's really, really important about this interpretation, because by not following through, by not putting hallmarks on your silver, when it could be interpreted that you should be, you are putting yourself at legal risk. You are then also putting your customers at legal risk, because all of this hallmarking legislation actually applies to everybody, not just the manufacturer and retailer of the silver in its first instance. Everybody is bound by this in the UK. So if Joe Bloggs buys a piece of poured silver from somebody and they haven't hallmarked it, and then he goes on to sell it and it's deemed that it does require a hallmark, he is at fault. Joe Bloggs is at fault for not hallmarking or not having it assayed. And that is awful. I mean, can you imagine if you did that and you found yourself suddenly at the whims of some trading standards officer and he deemed that you were breaking the legislation? Now, in real terms, that is, of course, incredibly unlikely to happen, but it's no excuse as to why it can't happen. And if it does, of course, it's going to have some serious issues. Another thing, by the way, that I haven't mentioned is I see quite a lot now, people are hammering bars of silver. That is, in my opinion, an aftermarket effect that you are adding to it to create something which is more than bullion by making it more pretty. You are taking something, you are taking raw form silver, if you were, and you're creating art pieces out of it. That is the interpretation by which I put it there. So again, legal requirements to hallmark. And I just don't understand why people might do this. Now, I can understand one reason why. So in fact, I'm going to go 2 reasons why. There's cost, which is arguably the most important reason why people don't do it. They want to cut corners, they cost. It's just a nightmare to organise, and the time and energy and effort that you need to go into this is really important to get your assay results done properly. So that's one thing. And the second one is, in my opinion, laziness. And there is no excuse for that in my book. And I have seen silver producers who have got assay registration offer silver that's not hallmarked. And I kind of asked myself in the back of my mind, well, why? What's the point of that? What's the point in going to all of the expense of registering with the assay office, having things sent through previously, and then not assaying certain items? I think that's just, there's definitely an air of laziness there, or there's something more sinister going on, that people are worried about assay failures. And you know, I will tell you right now that I've had assay failures. I have had assay failures on a gold bar. I've had assay failure on silver before. And you just never know when things might go wrong. I use as pure silver as I can source from the Canadian Mint. It comes mostly from there. But it doesn't stop potential contamination happening within my own household, within my own system. And the time that I had an assay failure was because iron oxide had worked its way into a small batch of silver that I was using. And when I poured it, there were these little tiny iron oxide spots on the top of my silver, which could be cleaned off very easily, but I didn't notice them, I didn't see them, and when they went into assay, they failed. And if I hadn't done that, and if I'd sent that out to a customer as was, and that customer then went to a dealer and got it, you know, tested by an XRF machine, and they put the pinpoint thing on there and it came up with iron oxide, or it failed, you know, that's awful. I wouldn't want that. I just would not want that. So I think from my point of view, hallmarking is a very much legal requirement. Now, of course, there are, as I said, those exemptions. There are those loopholes that people will look to. My opinion is that if you exploit those loopholes, or if you warp the definition of those loopholes to your own means to get away in your mind of why you're not hallmarking, I think that is, in my opinion, morally very grey, morally very irresponsible. I think you're putting potentially your customers at risk down the line, and I think that's not good, and I think that's not appropriate. So from my perspective, we hallmark everything. You know, there was a time that I didn't hallmark because I didn't know about it when I got started, and that's fine. If you are just getting started now and you are doing this just as a experiment for yourself, and you're not intending that you sell these as retail and etc., then fine. You can pour as many silver bars as you like for yourself and keep them and enjoy them. But if you're doing it as a hobby, and this is coming up more and more this year with COVID and people being at home, stuck at home, trying new hobbies and enjoying them, and that's great. And I am so impressed with some of the work that I'm seeing coming out from people. But when a hobby turns into a self-sustaining hobby business, you need to understand and watch what the legislations are. And from somebody who works so hard to work with these requirements, these hallmarking requirements and legislation, it is quite annoying to see people quite flagrantly ignoring them and cutting corners when other people work so hard to ensure the purity and guarantee of their pieces, and to then see others not do it is awful. Now, I do want to reiterate, this is a UK thing, so I am not in any way disparaging non-UK silver pourers and the lack of assay marks. If I was in the US and I was pouring away, I would probably not assay every single thing. If I had the option of assaying, I probably still would, because the additional cost of the assay marks themselves actually sometimes far outstrip in benefit than they do in cost. So from my perspective, I'm really not actually too bothered about the cost side of things. The most frustrating thing to me is the time frame of which I produce an item to which I can then dispatch it and release it out for general sale. You know, it's a process that it has to go through. It's often 2 or 3 or 4 weeks sometimes to produce something to when it's ready to go, and that's frustrating. So, but from my perspective, I don't think there's anything wrong with buying pieces of silver that are not hallmarked from producers outside of the UK. But if you're in the UK, even by the way, if you're selling to somebody based in the US, as long as the item that you're selling it, if it's based in the UK when you sell it, that location of the item, not the location of the customer, is what is key. So that's another thing that people often say is not required. It is. It's a legal requirement. It is very, very important. And as I said, I think it's not just legally important, I think it's morally important for people to understand. Now, what can we all do as consumers? Well, I personally think that there is a lot to be said about pushing back on silver producers here in the UK that are offering things that are not hallmarked. If you see something that you really like and you'd like to buy that isn't hallmarked, it's been advertised as unhallmarked, ask them. You know, it's on this card here. Ask if it's hallmarked. It's your guarantee. For you as the seller, for you as the buyer, beg your pardon, it is so important to have that guarantee, to have that maker's mark, to have that purity mark on there. And if anybody is producing silver on such a level that they are retailing something that looks pretty, you need to have this sorted. It needs to be done. You know, there are various different assay offices in the UK. I'm sorry about the light here today. Various different assay offices here in the UK, the London, Birmingham, Sheffield and Edinburgh. There's offices for everybody. I use the Edinburgh one. I find them really good. And I know there's a lot of other people that do too. So in my opinion, hallmarking is not only a legal requirement, it's a moral imperative most of the time as well. I think if you're hallmarking your silver and selling it, you'll find so much more success than not. I will finish this video up by saying that the only reason that our poured silver, the Backyard Bullion branded poured silver, is popular enough that I can do this for a living, that I have been able to shackle or take off the shackles of, you know, horrible sat at work desks, staring at computer screens and just dying with despair inside, is because of hallmarking, because of the additional demand that comes from having a piece of silver that is hallmarked. You know, I see a lot of people who give feedback to pieces of silver that come up for sale, and people ask, why hasn't that come up for sale? It's not hallmarked. And when you have the hallmark on it, it suddenly becomes a lot more popular and people recognize that. And it's really, really important. So anyway, look, that's my ranty ramble out of the way on hallmarking. You know, I do have, in a sense, kind of this ulterior motive to make the video here today because I'm feeling very strongly about this at the moment. I've seen more and more producers of silver here in the UK not hallmarking, and it's very, very morally questionable. So I would encourage anybody that is producing their own silver to really have a good hard think about the legislation, about what exactly they are looking to achieve with their products, and whether or not, if challenged by someone like Trading Standards, if you were even ever taken to court or a tribunal about this, would you be able to defend your case? And would you want to defend your case? Personally, I would never want to be in that situation. And the simple solution is to embrace hallmarking. Yes, it's an added cost up front, but it adds value over time, and in my opinion, pays for itself and more over that period of time. So anyway, look, there we have my thoughts and opinions on hallmarking. It is just a collection of thoughts and opinions. If you have any concerns, if you have any thoughts or questions about hallmarking or about anything that you've heard me say about in today's video, then please feel free to get in touch and let me know down in the comments as well if you'd like to know more about this topic, about this area of legal requirements for hallmarking, because I know for a fact that the Chief Operating Officer of the Edinburgh Assay Office has talked with me about hallmarking before, and I know that he'd be keen to promote and, you know, champion the reasons why hallmarking is also not just a legal requirement, but a moral imperative as well. So if you're interested in something like that and you'd like me to get in touch with them to arrange perhaps an interview over Zoom or something, then let me know and we can get things underway perhaps for that. But otherwise, that is it from me today. A big thank you to everybody for watching. And if you have enjoyed this video, please remember to put a thumbs up on it. And if you want to see content like this in the future, then make sure you hit that subscribe button, because we are fast closing in on 30,000 subscribers, which is an awesome milestone. Really, really fun to get there. Otherwise, that's it. Big thank you to you all. As always, see you on the next video, and please make sure that you like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.